Hello, my name is Keith. I'm going to talk to you about monetization, marketing for mobile indie games specifically. So I'm co-founder of Execution Labs, and just sort of by way of introduction to give you a little context, Execution Labs is actually an incubator and accelerator for mobile games. We're based in Montreal, though I'm based here in San Francisco. And what we do is we basically we take in teams of independent game designers, 5 people or so, give them some funding, a lot of coaching, a lot of mentoring. The idea is to get a game out the door in like 6 months, and then do an acceleration phase on top of that, which is another 3 months or so. But we just launched in January, which means we don't have games on the market yet. So I'm almost qualified to give this talk. But if you give me a couple months, we'll have a lot more data for you. But we do have some games that are shipping now, and really the purpose of this talk is to, well, let me ask, how many people are actually indie developers in here? All right. Okay, cool. So most of you. So good. So the idea is to actually talk through the problems that we've been encountering and sort of the questions that we have and tell you exactly how we're dealing with them. And maybe it'll work and maybe it won't, but it's our best guess. So we're basically, as I said, a bunch of indie game studios under one roof. And we're facing a lot of issues, and it's the same stuff that you're facing. So this is what we're going to talk about. What games we're building. So that's kind of a big question. How do you think about your monetization? What do you do with analytics? How do you launch specifically? How do you roll out? How are you going to monetize? Through ads, acquiring users, live ops. Like, obviously, each of these topics is a whole sort of session in itself. We're going to try to hit the high notes. So, as I mentioned, when teams come to Execution Labs, they don't really come to us with anything built, generally speaking. They maybe have some game design documents. Generally not a prototype or anything like that. So one of the things that we ask the team to go through is our series of exercises that help them think about what game they're building and why they're building it, right? So first, let's make this assumption. This is an indie track, so there's a lot of other, you may be building an indie game as a student project, as a way to learn stuff, as to sort of dip your toes in the water of mobile or whatever. The assumption here is that all the teams that come to us want to make money, at least enough money to make their next game, right? So let's set that as a baseline. So we go through sort of this idea of finding a Goldilocks pie slice. So if you think of the mobile gaming market, sort of a big pie, and there's all these genres or different pie slices. You quickly see that some pie slices are very large and some are very small. And what we try to do is try to find that pie slice that is just right. So what I mean by that is if a team comes in and says, we want to build a collectible card game, right? There's so much money being made in collectible card games, you can't believe it. We would probably say, you know what? A lot of people are having that same thought right now. A lot of people with big budgets, maybe stay away from CCGs for now. Right? So that would be a pie slice that's too big. On the other hand, you might have a pie slice that is, hey, I want to build a game that's strategy, but relies on geotagging and it's for teenage girls or something. And we would say, maybe a little bit too risky for you guys right now. You're 5 guys and really hard to tell. So, we're looking for that sort of in-between where there's some examples of games that are somewhat similar, or at least you can draw upon for inspiration. And I think that's a safer bet for a small indie studio. We also do some pretty rigorous competitive analysis when you first come into the program. And that's usually finding successful games like yours is a big part of that, or at least that have components that are like yours. So it's pretty easy to look on the app charts and find which games are doing well. And if you're doing a game, it's like, oh, this one that has attributes of mine is doing well. So that's pretty easy to see, sort of, okay, this is validation. It's actually much more important. It's to find games that are like yours that failed. And that's hard to do, right? Because you don't see those games. You never hear about them, right? And we use App Annie. And by the way, throughout the presentation, I'll be sharing all the sort of the vendors and tools that we use because we like them and we think they're useful. So finding the games that didn't make money, that are like yours, is like an incredibly humbling experience our teams find. And it's also, it can be scary, but it's incredibly useful. So this is just a sample. This is a piece of a competitive analysis that one of our teams has recently done. They're basically going through and looking at successful games finding out why they were successful, what the press liked about them, where they topped out in the charts. But they're also doing, and again, this is a piece, they're looking at failures, at least from a monetary standpoint, right? The scary part is that a lot of these games have 4.5 stars, 5 stars, but they didn't monetize. And remember, we're trying to make some money here. So one of the key components of this is finding that assumed reason why that game failed and sort of locking that in, putting that into your design documents, because you want to make sure that you're trying to avoid these things that you're pretty sure other people screwed up on. All right? So, monetization. All the teams in Execution Labs so far have decided to build free-to-play games. That's not something we mandate, but everyone has sort of made that decision on their own. When you do that, it is absolutely important to think about what those levers are going to be as soon as you start building your game. It doesn't mean that you have to have all your IEP pricing in place, but it does mean that if you're going to monetize through a collecting mechanic or some social pressure or whatever it is, that's sort of in there and that's sort of baked in. Because it's really almost impossible to decide to build a game and then retroactively, when you're getting ready to launch, to figure out what the mechanics are so you can sell it as a free-to-play game. And that's one of the reasons we designed the program like we have. I mean, their teams are with us for 9, 12 months, because we get them when the game is already cooked. There's not much we can do to help. And this last bullet doesn't necessarily fit on this slide. There's nowhere else to put it. But you'll see throughout here that we use SDKs for multiple purposes. If you're a small team, if you're 3 guys or 5 guys or whatever, you're going to see there's a lot of cool tools on the market. And you're like, oh, that SDK is good. That SDK is good. But you can end up with 10 SDKs easily. So if you can find ones that have multiple purposes, you're going to spend a lot less time on QA, a lot less time on updates, and it's going to make your life a lot easier. So launching the game, right? Again, this is like could be a whole talk. But just in general, roll out in small markets. Don't just launch the game on everywhere, right? What we're doing for our first couple of games, we actually have one that just is launching the next day or two. We're launching in New Zealand and Australia to start, possibly Taiwan if we need a few more users. But the idea is that this is really sort of our stress test market, right? We're just trying to see if the game is broken or not. So we want people to play through it and get through all the levels and that kind of thing. Then we'll do Canada for monetization. That's when we'll really start seeing what what the monetization is looking like, what the retention rates, all that fun stuff. Let me go back. And then we're giving ourselves 30 days, which I think is sort of the minimum in a beta period. I mean, there's large publishers, large studios will spend months in beta while they're testing, but as an indie studio, you don't have the time, you don't have the money. But at least with 30 days, you get that 30-day retention number, right? So 30 days, good ballpark. That's what we're aiming for to start. Again, analytics, I mean, it's casual connects, so everyone here has opinions on analytics. This is sort of our general thought on this thing. Do something that you can manage, right? You're a small team, make sure that whatever and pick a third-party vendor. You don't need to build your own thing. Don't roll your own right now. The analytics providers have come a long way in the last couple of years. And I mean, some of them are amazing. And there's so many bells and whistles. But the fact is, you're going to have to figure out, which features you're going to use, right? And if it's too much, you're never going to use it. So get something you can wrap your head around. Get 80% there. You don't have to be Gree or Pocket Gems or whoever when you launch. You need to be decent at analytics, but you don't have to be amazing, right? So get something that gets you most of the way there. You can add on stuff later. And give a team member ownership of this stuff. You'll see when you start to, if you haven't done this before, you're going to see there's tons of events you have to track. There's lots of stuff to hook up. Find someone who likes this stuff on your team and sort of have them own it. And we're using Flurry. We think Flurry definitely gets us 80% there for most of our teams. We'll be adding on our own stuff. But for now, Flurry, and as I mentioned earlier, Flurry has some other features of their SDK that we can utilize for other things. So as an indie, as I mentioned, that's important. Monetizing through advertising, another big topic. Discussed with all the teams. Nobody at Execution Labs wants to use banner ads, which is fine. No problem with that. I mean, most of our games are sort of mid-core, hardcore-ish, and that's okay. I think if you're doing a casual game with tons of impressions, maybe banner ads or something you could look at. But understandably, a lot of indies don't want to, corrupt the user experience or whatever. So we're going to use the video ads. because at least in that instance, we have people who are like, oh, I want to watch this video for free currency or whatever. And as I said, we're already using Flurry's SDK. We may add some others later on, but video ads are pretty non-intrusive. We'll use chart boosts, interstitials. We're also going to be using them, as I'll talk about, for other stuff. We'll also be using Playhaven's interstitial unit. And so these are three advertising monetization tools that we're using that are all off the shelf, super easy to integrate. User acquisition. Again, we could talk about this for an hour or 10 hours. It's hard. We can only allocate $10,000 per team as a baseline, and that's not very much. You figure each user costs you $2, right? So we're going to spend about $2,000 of that during our beta period in Australia and in Canada. The idea there is just to make sure we have enough users, critical mass, who are banging on the game to make sure it's working okay. Maybe we don't have to spend that if the game just gets a bunch of users on its own. During the beta, we'll also use AdMob for testing our icons. It's super easy, and it costs you about $100 to make a bunch of icons and to use different copy to see which ones get the highest click-through rates. Boom, you got your icon, right? Super easy, super cheap. We'll also be using Millennial because they have some cheap CPC advertising that we can use to get those initial users in. We don't care so much about the quality of the user as long as they bang around on the game somewhat. IAD, now they have their own self-service platform, and you'll see all these things are self-service because we don't want to be writing big insertion orders for $20,000, $30,000, $40,000. So it's important it's all self-service. We can do $200 at a time or whatever. So IAD's new workbench is brand new, and then also, as I mentioned, Flurry has some user acquisition tools we might use as well. And everyone ought to know Chartboost in this room, and Playhaven as well. Chartboost has a really cool way of allowing you to swap impressions with other games, right? And it's free. You just have to find the people that you want to swap with. We've actually done a little partnership with them, and we call it Lab Partners, which is basically a subsite of Execution Labs that allows you to find other indie developers who want to do cross-promotion. And it's totally free. It's just a service. So you can find them, and then once you find people you want to partner with, we toss you over to Chartboost, and they hook it up, and you're off and running. Playhaven also has a Get More Games widget, which is super easy to implement. And we'll use that to cross-promote the other Execution Labs games. And that just sits on your menu, Get More Games, shows up. You can also monetize through that. So again, using SDKs that have multiple purposes. And then finally, we just heard an entire presentation on live ops. It's a big deal, especially for an indie studio. It's a service. If you're planning on doing events, this has to be part of your planning. If you're a four-man team and you know that you have this update schedule that you want to hit, if you're not counting on the fact that one of your guys is going to be spending half of his time at least on live ops, you're going to miss all your milestones post-launch, right? So that has to be part of your planning. And then finally, I'm not personally a big believer in using industry available metrics for your comps. So, I mean, you can read different blogs and stuff that say, oh, you should aim for, this retention after 1 day and 7 days and, whatever. Or, this is your conversion rate, or, this is your ARPU, or this is your time to first purchase. I mean, in the absence of other data, use it. Go on blogs, see what Flurry or Tapjoy have to say about this stuff, because that stuff is useful in the absence of other information. But what you really want to do is find games that are similar to yours, because these numbers are wildly different depending on the genre and the audience. So we're actually sort of in a good position of having games that for the most part have similar audiences. So we're going to be benchmarking against one another. So we can see, okay, this team doing this, so we ought to be aiming for this. So try to go out, find other indies who are willing to share some of these baseline numbers so that you can get some idea of the health of your game before you launch. So that's all I got. I want to leave some time for questions. I think we have a few minutes left. If we don't get to them, email me. Find me after the show. I'll be here all week. And as I said, I live here in San Francisco. So without all
yeah, if anyone has any questions, and we can bring around a microphone to make sure it gets heard.
Hey, thanks for the talk. So I had a question regarding that 10K budget you said for like the beta and testing. So my understanding is that with mobile games that our studio has been putting out, like when we do like ad campaigns, like we do the 10K like tests. After that point, like, do you believe that a burst campaign is the way to go, or do small increments of like high quality traffic, or how?
Yeah.
What's the best way to approach it?
Yeah, it's a good question. So the 10K, I mean, we're going to spend a couple grand of that during testing, and then at launch we'll do the rest, and maybe we'll spend a little more on top of that. Of course, once we're LTV positive, we can continue to spend. But I think that small amounts, I think burst campaign is not the way to go. I think to get to a successful burst campaign, you've got to spend more money than you're likely to have access to as an indie. I think that keeping your marketing spend sort of under the 50,000 range is smarter than sort of landing in the no man's land of like 300 grand or 200 grand. I mean, these big publishing studios are spending hundreds and hundreds of thousands. I think it's easy to get trapped in the middle and spend 200,000 or 100,000 and still see no return. Better to be safe and sort of incrementally spend 10, 20, 30. But don't go for a burst campaign. Get quality users, I think.
Use Australia because it's English speaking. CPIs are higher than some other English.
Yeah. No, we use it purely because it's English speaking, but we will likely not necessarily spend for installs in Australia. We'll see how it goes. But yeah, so the question was, do we use Australia because it's English speaking?
Have you ever thought about like Indonesia or Philippines or Malaysia?
Yeah, those are all good choices. When it comes to monetization, I feel more comfortable with Canada because my feeling is that they behave more like Americans and Europeans in their spending habits. Broad strokes, granted, but generally speaking, I would feel more comfortable with that than. But as far as just like getting people to bang on the game, I really don't care so much what country they're in as long as they understand what's happening. One more?
You mentioned SDKs, but you're talking about integration of a lot of libraries. Do you have a specific one that you recommend?
A specific library?
Yeah, that you mandate for the teams, or?
No, I don't. In fact, we do very little of that in terms of mandating anything for the teams. We do share libraries, but I'm not. First of all, probably not the best person to ask. But secondly, it's really up to the team. I mean, they're all using different platforms and different engines and stuff too. So.
I talked a little bit with.
Yeah, we have four of the teams here.
They're very forthcoming. They were very technically, informed.
Good.
And I was really intrigued. That's why I actually came to this talk. So.
Oh, great. Well, I'll thank them. Thank you. Yep. Oh.
What's your particular strategy in terms of cross-platform? Is it like, hey, we're going iOS only, we're going, everything must launch?
So far, everyone is targeting iOS as a rollout, and then Android. We have 4 teams building in Unity. 4 teams building in Unity. 1 team is building in Marmalade and Cocoa Studio, and everyone is sort of building using cross-platform engines. So the idea is to fairly quickly go to Android after launching iOS.
So most people I talk to, they target iOS, and I feel like one of the reasons they do that is just because, the sort of propaganda is iOS monetizes so much more highly than Android. But I feel like that's a bit of a red herring in that, like, Android you can generate like 10 to 100x the downloads you can get from iOS.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the big issues for indies is it's how many different devices do you have to support on Android, right? How many different screen sizes? How many different? With iOS, you got basically 3 different form factors you got to deal with. On Android, granted, there's a couple, there's a handful that make up most of the market, but you're still looking at having to build for that, and it's not trivial. Right. Okay, everyone, thanks for coming. I really appreciate it.